Howdy everyone, and welcome back to The More You Grow. I've been in the greenhouse doing a little work this morning, and it's finally not burning hot in here for a change. Usually when I'm doing a video here in the greenhouse, I feel like I gotta change my shirt 3 times because I get so covered in sweat when it gets hot in here. But anyways, one of the things I need to do today is I need to transplant my miracle berry tree. Now, I thought this would be a great time to talk a little bit about this plant, how awesome it is, the requirements it needs, and how you can grow one of these yourself at home. So let's go check it out. So what is miracle berry and why am I growing it? Miracle berry is a shrub from tropical West Africa, long used by the native people of that region, but was discovered by Europeans in 1725. This will produce a bright red berry. It doesn't have much flavor itself, but what it does is it contains a chemical called miraculin that will actually change your taste buds. Because what that chemical will do is it will bind to your sour and bitter taste buds for a short period of time, to where if you eat anything that's sour or bitter, it will become sweet. So if you were to eat a lemon after eating one of these berries, it will make it taste like lemon candy. And if you don't have one of these plants yourself, there is a way you can still experience this. They produce a tablet version with the chemical of this berry inside of it that melts on your tongue, and it provides the same effect. So if you want to try this out, there are tablets that go by different names, such as M-berry or miracle berry tablets, and it's a super fun experience. I actually did a video where me and my friend that you've seen on the channel before, Boomhauer from Boomhauer TV 17, did a video where we tried the M-berry tablets, the miracle berry tablets, and did a whole taste test of different things. If you want to see that video, I'll leave a link up above. But one of the best ways you can experience this, and if you want the full experience, is you can actually grow one of these plants yourself. There's lots of nurseries out there that grow these. I can leave the link to the nursery I used that I bought this from. So why not just grow it yourself? Get the plant yourself and give it a try. So I've been growing this for a little while. It's time for it to get a new pot. So we're gonna transplant this up, and I'll talk a little bit about the requirements of miracle berry as I go along. Alrighty guys, to get started, we're gonna choose our container. If you saw Container Plant Success episode 1, I talked all about choosing the right container for the plant you're trying to grow. In this case, we're gonna choose this 3-gallon container here, because we're going to move the miracle berry up from this 1-gallon container. That's gonna allow its roots to expand out and the plant to get a lot larger so it can start fruiting. A lot of times people run into a problem with their fruit trees because they don't give it a big enough container. If you don't give it a large enough container for what you're trying to grow, it'll either not produce fruit at all or produce very little fruit. So understand the fruit trees you're trying to grow, and be sure you give them a right size container. The next thing we need to do is we need to fill this up with our soil. If you saw in Container Plant Success episode 2, I talked all about choosing the right soil for the plant you're trying to grow. In this case, that's very important because miracle berry requires a high acid soil, kind of like blueberries. And we're gonna choose a soil that's gonna give it that low pH, that high acid soil, and give it the right balance of nutrients that it needs. So I'll take y'all to do that next. Alright, to get our soil all mixed up here, what I'm gonna choose for this job is some peat moss. I've got some peat moss here, and I've also got some composted pine bark down here in this box. And that's going to work really well because it's going to provide that acidity that the miracle berry needs, and it doesn't put in a whole lot of nutrients. Miracle berry is really sensitive to high fertilizers where it will burn it very easily. Miracle berry requires pretty low nutrients for the most part. So by putting this in here, it's not adding a whole lot of nutrients in as if I were to use a commercial mix, and I can really choose the level of nutrients I want to add into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up here, and we're going to do a 50-50 mix of peat moss to composted pine bark. And if you don't have composted pine bark, that's okay. You can actually do a peat moss and perlite 50-50 mix. That'll work really well. So I'm just gonna fill this up, do about half and half, and I'll get right back to you on just a little bit. Alrighty, I've got some of our composted pine bark and peat moss all mixed up in the bottom of the pot here. I haven't filled it up yet because we really want to put in our tree at the right level before we fill it all the way. The reason why you want to do that is you want to get the level of your tree just right in your pot. You don't want it to be up over the top of the pot. You don't want it to be too deep in the pot, because the reason why that is you don't want to bury up the stem with your soil mix, because that can provide rot on the stem. It'll cause rot on the stem, can cause diseases. You want to be sure to get the soil level right at the base. You don't want to cover it too much over the top, and you don't want it sticking up above the soil either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our miracleberry tree now, and we're going to wiggle this pot a little bit, try to work it out of here gently. And what we're going to do now is we need to loosen these roots up just a little bit. That way it will expand out a lot quicker and start colonizing the pot with all these roots. So I'm going to loosen these up just a little bit, get some of that worked out, and it's going to get this thing off to a great start. When you have container plants, you want to make sure they're not root bound, which means that the roots aren't all wrapped up on each other. You want to be sure that the root tips can find that new soil. So loosen up just a little bit, unless that plant is sensitive with its roots. You don't want to disturb them too much if that's the case. But for the most part, I say go ahead and loosen up those roots just a little bit so I can find that new soil. So we're going to gently take our miracleberry here, set it down in our pot just so, where it's a little bit below the lip of the pot. The reason why you want to do that is when you water this thing, if you got it right at the top, all that water is just going to run off the side of the pot. It's not going to go down into the soil. So I'll leave just a little bit, a few inches right below the pot to where the soil level is, so that way it holds onto that water. So I've got our miracleberry put in. We're going to go ahead and add some more soil around the base of this. I'm going to put in a little pine bark, a little peat moss. You can pre-mix these if you want, to where you can just add it in without having to mix it up all at the same time. I should have done that, but being a little lazy today, guys. So I'm just going to keep mixing this together and putting it around the base of this, and I'll give you a close-up once I get done. Well, as you can see, we have our container all filled in now with a 50-50 mix of peat moss and composted pine bark. If you don't have pine bark around, composted pine bark around, you can do a 50-50 mix of peat moss and perlite. That'll work really well. Now finish it off with a layer of composted pine bark. What that's going to do is that's going to help with our water retention. We don't want the soil to stay soggy or anything, but we want it to be kind of moist. What that's going to do is it's going to hold in that water without leaving the soil super soggy. And as you can see, I left a few inches from the top of the container, and that's going to help with our water. It's going to make it where the water doesn't just run over the top of the pot, and it keeps it all in the pot where it can sink in. Which leads me to my next point. We need to talk about water with miracleberries, because there is a very specific requirement with water that these plants have to have for success. Let's talk about the water requirements for miracleberry, because they have very specific water requirements that you cannot ignore. You want to water miracleberry with either rainwater, distilled water, or reverse osmosis or deionized water, because there's things in your tap water, well water, city water that's going to negatively affect this plant. Things such as chlorine. It'll have a chlorine toxicity that's very sensitive in this plant, that you cannot have any chlorine in your water. You don't want to have any dissolved minerals such as calcium in your water, because that calcium is going to take our high acid soil that we need and turn it into a basic soil, and it's really going to affect that pH negatively for this plant. And if you live in areas like we do, where we have super high sodium in the tap water, you don't want to water your plants with that, because you're going to start seeing saline toxicity from all of the salts in the water, and it's just really going to affect this plant really badly. They're very sensitive, so always water with only rainwater or distilled water or reverse osmosis water if you have that. As far as other water requirements of your miracleberry, I just kind of water it as needed. I like to let the soil dry down a little bit before I water it again. I don't let the leaves wilt down or anything, but I kind of feel the soil out and make sure to let it dry down just a little bit before I water it again. You don't want to constantly just keep this thing soaked. But other than that, that's really about it as far as water requirements. So now that we got our water requirements covered, let's talk about the light requirements and fertilizer requirements of this plant. Miracleberry do well in a partial sun to a full sun environment. I like to say I give mine 3/4 sun, because I give them as much sun as possible without putting them in that direct, bright noonday heat. They don't seem to do as well in that. So I will pull them under the porch for the middle of the day heat and light and give them as much sun as possible elsewhere. As far as temperatures go, this is a tropical tree, so you cannot leave it outside if you live in an area that gets freezes. I like to keep mine above 50 degrees, around 75 to 85 degrees is optimal. During the winter, I just bring it into my garage where I keep it above 50 in there, and it seems to do just fine until the next spring where it can take off again. As far as fertilizers go, these guys don't need a whole lot of nutrients. They come from historically a pretty poor soil from their native region, so they do well in a low nutrient situation. In fact, if you give these guys too much fertilizer, they'll start to burn the leaves. They're pretty sensitive to high levels of fertilizer. So when I fertilize this guy, I give it about a 1/4 strength dilution of the recommended rate. So I dilute it down to about 1/4 of what the fertilizer package recommends, and I give it a water at that. You always want to give your Miracleberry fertilizer when the soil is moist. You don't want to give it to it when it's dry, or it's going to burn the roots, burn the leaves. So all we have to do now is we just have to wait for this guy to get bigger, to start producing fruit, and then when that happens, I'll be sure to show you that when it comes along. So if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you have any more questions for me on Miracleberry trees or how to take care of them, leave it down in the comments. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Go check us out on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, I hope you'll join me right here on The More You Grow.